This video represents my opinion, and I do not want my statements to be seen as factual. I do not condone any harassment to any developers of Baguio whatsoever. Alright, thank you. I've been playing Vinestaff for the past 10 months at this point. Now, 10 months is a long time, and putting 10 months into a character in a Roblox game sounds crazy, and yeah, it is crazy. However, that's because I have loved playing Vinestaff for such a long time, and her entire bag of tools is fun and engaging to use despite being the most true support character in fighting. However, ever since her rework in March, Vinestaff has gotten noticeably worse in every single aspect. Today, I'll be doing a somewhat in-depth dive on Vinestaff, what went wrong, and how she has ended up as easily one of, if not, the worst character in the game when it comes to competitive. Also, this is a highly opinionated video. If you disagree or agree with me, we can talk about it in the comments, as I am interested in others' opinions. Let's go. Okay, so to keep it much more neat, I won't be going over all the buffs and nerfs that Vine got after her rework because there are so damn many changes to her stuff that I can't really describe all of it. Let's just say she was pretty garbage, so she got tons of buffs and adjustments during the rework period. For this video, we will be focusing on her current stuff as of now, because that's what you can play with right now. I wanted to talk about why Vine even got a rework in the first place. Now, let me say this. I think Vine was honestly a fine character for the most part. She set herself apart from Medkit in many ways and in gameplay style, which gave her some advantages over Medkit despite not really being on the same level as Medkit, as this was during a time where Medkit ran the entire game, and healerless comps were slowly on the rise to counter V's Medkit team compositions. The only real issue with Vine was her burst healing with E. For those who don't know, E-ing Sprouts gave burst of regen and instant healing, which allowed Vine to have a powerful burst heal option sometimes if high level Sprouts were around. This was obviously an issue because as the healer with Regen, burst healing on herself was obviously a bit of an issue. Other than that, I didn't see much problems with Vine as she was vulnerable to most dive characters and functioned off Regen instead of instant healing, but the self-sustain was insanely helpful to have in any way and it kind of made her a bit too much. And luckily, Aidn actually acknowledged this as a problem, which is fairly obvious, but then that makes me wonder, why the hell did we fully rework her entire kit when she had one problem that had a pretty obvious fix? Like, she was pretty fine honestly, and the only people I saw that really complained about Vinestaff outside of Burst E were open server players, which are a horrible metric to base it on because any character is godlike in opens because the skill level in those servers are so all over the place. There was more things mentioned in the thread, however, in the Vinestaff forum. However, I don't think I could really make any meaningful comments toward them. But yeah, Vine never needed this rework in the first place, but it would be fine if the rework didn't make her a very unfun character to use in the first place and actually made her somewhat fun to play as. Surely this would happen, right? Pretty much everything about Vinestaff was changed in some way. However, we should focus on core mechanics that change about Vine. Mainly the new status effect of Preservation. Preservation was the status effect that was applied by most of Vine's moves, which sped up regen speed by 50%. Honestly, this was a bit unnecessary, but I am fully welcome with the buffs I could get with a Vine rework, so that was nice I suppose. Vinestaff's passive functions the exact same. 12 M1 shots gives a sprout, you can hold 5 sprouts at once, and they give 5% haste and radius when you place them. I don't have to really say anything about the passive, other than the fact that the haste cap has been slightly increased to 30%, so that's a change that does something, I guess. Vinestaff M1 used to be a semi-fast projectile that did 6 damage and traveled a maximum of 250 studs. The new M1 here was a hit scan projectile that did 5 damage and traveled a maximum of 100 studs. While I could go on about why this is unnecessary, I do understand the intent behind why this was changed. While I don't personally experience it, I could see people having tons of trouble trying to hit Vine M1s because of its awkward projectile speed. So I guess making it hit scan and nerfing it in this way was kind of a way to help newer players hit the M1 more consistently. In that way, I can understand it. However, I just find it weird because of the whole dynamic between the healers. The thing I like between the two healers of Medkit and Vinestaff is that they are kind of different in all of their ways as a healer. Medkit did instant healing while Vine did regeneration. Medkit was more of a damage healer, while Vine focused much more on support capabilities compared to Medkit's offensive capabilities. And a way that this difference was seen was between their M1s. Medkit M1 is a hit scan projectile with 6 ammo and semi-auto fire, which made it act like a rifle of sorts. Vinestaff M1 used to be a projectile weapon with 50 ammo and auto fire, continuing the differences between the healers and what they do. It was a cool contrast to make the characters feel more unique between each other in many ways. While making the Vine M1 hit scan made it easier for people, I just think the loss of the unique traits between their M1s just kinda feels wrong to me. Not a big issue or anything, but it just feels so pointless to just change. Also, due to it being hit scan, it barely changes what Vine M1 could do in the first place. By 50 studs or so, old Vine M1 kind of felt like hit scan because the enemy was so up close to you that the slow projectile speed barely mattered in that regard, so it feels even more unnecessary to why this was changed. It still works somewhat well against tank characters at least, but that's just a given for Vinestaff at this point, so it's not surprising or anything. Other than that, I do agree with the range decrease, as 250 studs of range was just pretty absurd for a character like Vinestaff, but that's really all I can say about Vinestaff's M1. Vine M2 is kind of the same as it was, but mainly giving regen and a tiny bit of preservation when popping it. The sprouts can be on all types of surfaces and still have a 60 by 60 by 60 range. They also all have 60 HP in any stage, and the higher the stage, the more regen they give when they level up and such. When Vine is at max HP, however, her regen maxes out at a cap of 60. This regen cap is understandable for obvious reasons, as Vine's regen could potentially reach high numbers, but this cap becomes important as to why Vine feels so awkward to use later. Honestly, there's no real problems with how M2 works. It works fine as Vine's main way of giving healing. It can be annoying as sprouts give finisher points, and some finishers can wipe out sprouts on the point, which hurts Vine's effectiveness in holding down a point, and it will start to become much more noticeable when we really get to our downsides as a healer, but it works, so yeah. Vine Q was given a complete rework compared to its original state. The most I could see as to why Q was changed was because it was too simple, which I just don't agree with. However, the new Q is a bit weird to explain. So, it fires a projectile with a splash hitbox, and any enemies hit by the move get a flower icon on them. Any damage that our allies do to the affected enemies will be healed by 30% of their damage they do, which can include Vine's own damage. This move hitbox in general feels incredibly awkward. While the line of sight requirement was thankfully removed, the move coming from Vine's staff hitbox is still very awkward since the angle is naturally awkward and forces you to aim slightly to the left to even hit people with that small direct hitbox. The main issue with this move is how you need to communicate to your team to target people. Once you kill people, your team has 6 seconds to do actual damage to the enemy. Keep in mind, you gain no healing from the Q damage your teammates do, so you need to stay alive in that case. I could feel the difference of living when the Q didn't give Vine any healing when giving it to a teammate. And the fact that you need to effectively communicate the Q to use it well is still very off, as Vine is sometimes forced to play more aggressively to actually land a worthwhile Q because of its insanely long cooldown. I will also say, due to the somewhat weak hit feedback and visuals that get a bit chaotic mid-game, it can be a little hard to even realize your Q actually hit an enemy because the visual and audible feedback is so minimal that communicating out of a Q is hard in its own right. I think it's a cool attempt, but there's a few properties of using this move that make it feel very awkward for a character like Vinestaff specifically. Again, I don't think the move needed any type of rework. So Viney didn't get any damage changes to it, so it can still work as a defensive tool, but it's much worse at that. The 3 petals fired do 12 damage on splash and apply a 30% slow to the enemy, while the direct petals hit for 30 damage each and apply a stun debuff for 0.75 seconds for some reason. Since the self burst was an issue, this move's sprout burst effect was changed. Every sprout bursted would do an extra 12 damage, and every sprout hit would give Vine 5% haste for 2 seconds. This sprout usage is genuinely useless. Like, yes, it removes the burst heal, but this entire new effect for an aggressive take on move feels like it's just tacked on to remove burst heal. The extra haste doesn't even help much at all, and honestly, when the fuck does the damage even come into play? Total damage of Sprout is fucking nothing. And genuinely, when would burst haste even matter in any situation unless you're fighting Banhammer, who already struggles sometimes against Vine in the first place? You could also burst them for the 3 seconds of preservation and regen that they could give based on next stage, but why would you even do this? Combined with the hard regen cap Vine has, which we will get into, it makes this extra side benefit feel like it's existing just to replace burst heals. And using it as a self-sustaining tool is just laughable, because setting it up in the first place for that purpose is basically never happening in an actual game outside of opens. Other than the awful Sprout capabilities, E is okay at its job. Not hitting the direct can kind of destroy your self-defense though, as the 30% slow for every fighter is somewhat minuscule the more you look at it. But we will get into that. Vine Staff's finisher is honestly the best trait about her. What a surprise. It generates 3 waves of healing and regeneration to where Vine Staff used it, giving 20 burst heal and 80 procs of regeneration and a generous hitbox size along with upgrading your sprouts. This is probably the best tool Vine has at her disposal, as it gives her great self-sustain and tons of regen to her allies. However, the 150 finisher points requirement compared to other ults in the same category is a bit too much to ask for. For reference, this ult has the same amount of finisher points required as Divine Resurrection, Eviscerating Ray, and Judgment. All 3 of those finishers I mentioned are huge game changers in matches and can be the decision in tons of matches. Vine finisher doesn't decide matches, but it can help a lot in certain situations when playing Conquer, so it kinda just feels out of place in the 150 region, along with how shutting down Vine, as we will see, isn't such a hard task. And also for the sake of briefness, I'm going to refer to finishers as ults from this point on, so keep that in mind. With all of these tools, Vine has a game plan of building up her regeneration. By building her regeneration with tons of M2 sprouts and constantly growing them, Vine is supposed to make a hard wall of regeneration for her teammates to abuse to stay alive and lock down a point on a map to hopefully snowball from there. Combined with tools that allow preservation and ways to supposedly have good self-defense that is limited, she can hopefully use her team as walking bags of health to defend herself and be able to support everyone with healing. Or that's how it's supposed to go. Now, I know I went through a long tangent about Vine's rework and why it feels worse or why I went through the moves, but her rework is a part of a bigger problem with Vine Staff. This rework physically changes how she plays, and it just simply got worse. So, in competitive fighting, there's a set of fighters that we like to call dives. Dives are usually aggressive fighters that go into the enemy up close and personal. Think of fighters like Biograph or Shuriken, for example. These dive characters are great at getting supports, and every support has at least a way to avoid these dives. Medkit has good damage overall, and Q allows him to quickly go to his teammates. Boombox has great mobility that can excel at annoying and dodging them. Subspace has self M2s and E as an escape tool, and Coil has so many tools at his disposal to be an annoyance and evade everything. Vine has tools that do nothing for her mobility wise, and her self-defense tools are, to put it lightly, inconsistent. Q can apply slow for a bit, which only helps in like one matchup that she still sometimes loses, which is Banhammer, and the E itself just isn't enough. Yes, a direct E can root people, but let's face it, Vine can get easily outdamaged right after because of the power of dives. The only dive that it could potentially kill is Biograph, but that required tons of assistance, and actually even hitting a direct E in the first place. And that's not even factoring in if Vine only hits the splashy, which does putrid damage in its own right, and the 30% slow doesn't make up for it at all. No amount of M1 hit scan is saving you. Some people might argue that Vine's haste from sprouts can help her a lot, but honestly, 30% is fucking nothing in the grand scheme of things. Considering the fact that you will usually be around 20% to 25% a lot of the time, this again only is effective against Banhammer once more. Every dive character has some type of mobility tool to catch up to Vine Staff easily and dispatch her with no problems. Along with the fact Sprouts can just be destroyed by most moves in general to interrupt the haste, you might ask, well, what dives? Actually no, what fighters can Vine reasonably beat? Well, try losing to 12 fighters of the main roster. She could beat Katana due to them being easy to hit, and isn't destroyed by Medkit all too much because Medkit is mainly healing people instead of damaging Vine Staff. Every other character can somehow assist with or cleave through her no problem, or find barely any issues in picking her off because her self-defense is terribly inconsistent and limited. Fighters like Sword, Shuriken, Coil, and Rocket have little to no problem bursting through you as your self-defense options are never enough to keep them at bay. And characters like Slingshot, Boombox, and Skateboard keep you on high alert as they can burst you down rapidly and not give you any breathing room to get healing going. This also doesn't talk about the act of staggering. Vine is by far the easiest fighter to stagger progress from by a long shot, which causes her momentum to slow down completely and makes her attempting to get a regeneration wall near impossible. If Vine can't deal with the constant dives, then the comp made with Vine in mind to aid in healing starts to crumble since Vine cannot keep up and can't be defended reliably as she gets beat by all sorts of fighters that one cannot counter all at once. Like, yeah, my sword can beat your biograph and oh, well, that's Banhammer diving in to kill my Vine Staff, yeah, I can't help with that. And if multiple people work to defend Vine, the team loses out on lots of pressure offensively and starts to lose momentum overall, because they are so focused on trying to hope Vine doesn't die by any of the enemy team's dives, which is near impossible to keep in check at all. Oh, and since dives can destroy her Sprouts effectively because they give finisher points for the fighters hitting them, Vine's healing can get ruined just because of her Sprouts getting hit. Some finishers like Sword, Shuriken, or Katana destroy all Sprouts on a conquer point, or can be used to attempt a shutdown on Vine Staff at any point in time. Hell, Shuriken's ult is a Vine shutdown tool in its own right that you can only save it for Vine Staff ults, and almost all the time it will be a shutdown. I will also like to bring up Medkit and Coil once more in this discussion. Medkit and Coil have ways of self-sustaining themselves with their passive and Regen Coil respectively. While Vine also has self-sustaining, it got gutted significantly, as E-Bursts were her only reliable way of self-sustaining outside of her own ult, which can get shut down reliably by some fighters. However, due to the regen cap maxing if Vine is at full HP, her self-sustain can get fucking slashed out of nowhere for simply trying to stay alive at the wrong time. Let's talk about that regen cap, shall we? So, I actually have been mentioning the regeneration cap in passing, but I think it's time to fully explain the issue of this. Now, I am not saying to remove this cap, but this cap forces Vine's game plan in an awkward spot. Once Vine Staff hits max HP, her regen will be fully capped to 60 regen stacks forever until she loses HP and can finally increase it. It gets worse though! Every other fighter also gets the same regen cap at 60 as soon as they reach max HP. You can start to see the issue now. Since Vine Staff requires lots of setup to start her regen thanks to Sprouts being constantly placed to build more ways of regen, Vine's work can all be for fucking nothing only because her teammates get healed to full. And considering the waves of regen Vine can potentially reach, this can mean Vine gets punished for not playing the game aggressively. Let me repeat, the support character healer gets punished by losing all of her regen for playing the game safe. Her teammates get punished for playing the game safe by losing their regen too. This forces Vine and her teammates to play a bit more aggressively, and considering how terrible Vine's kit is for self-defense and staying alive compared to other supports, you can tell this is horrible. And not only that, her teammates also get punished if they don't play aggressively, as Vine's progress of building regeneration gets completely slashed, since now her teammates can't maintain regeneration at all. And considering how inconsistent regeneration is in the first place due to her Sprouts and how they function, this is incredibly bad for her in every single way as the most support-oriented character. To basically sum what all of this means, Vine is forced to play more aggressive against fighters who can easily dispatch her due to her inconsistent defensive tools. Her teammates need to play more aggressive with their HP to actually use the regen effectively, which is not only inconsistent, but incredibly risky, especially during scenarios like overtime, where playing safe is the main priority. Combining all of this with Vine's bad self-defense and the inconsistencies with team-wide Regen already, and the amount of Sprout Sight and how much Regen her teammates get, it makes her healing feel even more like a joke and just feels like it's just not working due to elements out of control via the Regen cap. And unfortunately, things get much worse. While she sounds bad already in the context of the game and the current meta, what if I told you there are characters who do her job much better in every way? Yeah, she is outclassed. Why use the inconsistent regeneration mechanic hampered by mechanics when instant healing is better? Why take time to build walls of inconsistent regen that can be torn through by a sword ult, where you can play fighters that give instant, reliable healing and do more for your team outside of the healing? Why play Vine Staff when Medkit exists? Medkit is obviously the other healer and is much more consistent, relying on good aim usually and having tools to warp himself to his teammates, cleansing tools, and arguably one of the best finishers in the game that can revive his teammates and give tons of healing to everyone in an instant. His instant healing needs no setup. His self-defense is much more consistent and better to have his team help him out, and even if it's not team-wide, he has many tools that can heal everyone around him like his E or the aforementioned finisher, which costs the same points as Vine Staff's own finisher. Even on maps where Vine Staff is able to snowball with a wall regeneration aren't good, because when she loses to snowballing, which can happen very easily, she struggles immensely to build up the same pressure with the vines. Medkit doesn't have that problem, since he immediately is able to keep instant healing teammates as usual no matter what the state of the game is, and his ult is much more consistent at rushing in and holding down the point thanks to its reviving mechanic and being instant instead of being very inconsistent regeneration that requires time to activate and can be easily shut down due to Vine Staff being Vine Staff. Anything Vine Staff can somewhat do, Medkit can do and much better. Medkit has much better matchups than anything Vine is up against, and Medkit has way more consistency and much more helpful tools for himself and his teammates to utilize. Medkit does much more consistent damage as well, and his headshots can help give extra healing to anyone around him, because his healing correlates to his good damage. And of course, he gets good self-sustain as long as you have the ability to hit scan shots, something Vine also needs to do for usually way less and a way more inconsistent reward. If being completely outclassed by the other healer in every single usable way isn't enough, Coil, yes, fucking Coil somehow is able to go toe-to-toe with Vine Staff's healing. This is due to his on-demand Regen tether being able to give some form of burst regeneration and healing, along with allowing Coil to build his rank up with his other tools to have stronger healing. Coil isn't even a literal healer, but yet he offers so much more versatility to a team and somehow consistent healing to his team, which Vine Staff only dreams of getting. While it does focus on one person at tether, Coil can do this type of healing while applying tons of offensive pressure onto dives and other enemies, and due to mechanics like regen caps and Vine being incredibly vulnerable to everything, Coil can work due to his great sustainability and ability to help anyone who needs healing or anything else that Coil could give. This character that isn't supposed to be a main healer can perform a better healing job than an actual healer in the game! This isn't even accounting all the other strengths Coil brings to the table, like being a distraction, his ult to get back point control, and much more utility and firepower he can bring to team comps. Vine is outclassed at her role by two other characters. How does that even happen to a character like Vine Staff? Surely it can't get any worse than this. Surely being outclassed at the end of it. Well, I got more to add to it. All of my talk for this entire video has been about Conquer, which is usually the main game mode for most competitive fighting matches, as it's the most fun game mode. And Annihilate is usually an unpopular game mode due to its different focus and map pool. The reason why I never mentioned Annihilate is for a very simple reason. Vine is completely unviable, and somehow even worse on Annihilate. On Annihilate, teams usually run a ton of dive fighters, or just fighters with strong offensive tools to rush in. In a mode where kills matter the most, Vine Staff does not have enough offensive power or defensive tools to where she struggles to live even a single dive character. And when her game plan relies on playing more aggressive than most, being killed by a simple dive is a huge blow to her own team for obvious reasons. Her best matchups on Annihilate is against any of the tanks, who are insanely uncommon picks in the first place. And even then, normal comps do better against tanks than Vine ever could on these types of team compositions, despite her kind of being a pseudo tank buster. Hell! Subspace does the tank busting job better on Annihilate, and he is absolutely dog shit on Annihilate. At least Subspace has escape tools and better ways to chip the opponent down thanks to his poison applied by trip mines in some way, along with his finisher acting in a more defensive role. Oh, and as for healing, yeah, Mecha and Coil Outclass are even harder. Like, it's not even funny anymore. Going Vinestaff on Annihilate has become from situational with some team comps to being a flat-out throw pick that you should never use. She cannot get any Regen going because of the map's not benefiting her sprouts much outside of Chaos Canyon. Every single popular Annie character mauls her no matter what. The other healing characters outclass her at her main job. Her chip damage is inferior to everyone else, and the best fighter she can be against an Annihilate already get burned by a bunch of the normal characters you see in Annihilate, with other options outclassing her in the matchups she can benefit from in the same game mode. Vinestaff is nothing but complete fodder and is actively throwing if you use her. This character just can't catch a single fucking break no matter what at this damn rate, bro. To give an overall summary of Vine now, Vine is terrible. She is outclassed by Mecha and Coil at her job. Her damage is outclassed by most fighters in the game. Her healing and snowballing is incredibly inconsistent. Her defensive tools aren't enough. Her self-sustain got screwed over. Very specific comps are needed to support her, and even her on her best maps still struggles. Along with the hard rise of healerless compositions, Vinestaff can't catch a single fucking break in this game, and keeps on getting rolled over by other characters. Even if she beats one person diving her, she has no resources to help herself live, so the entire cycle repeats. Your team is so much better off running no healer, or running medkit and or coil, as Vinestaff is way too inconsistent for the commitment needed for her to be good. And Annihilate, don't even bother. Now, Vine is pretty terrible. I have made that very clear now to you, that she gets outclassed by every single character in almost any role she can do. So, is there any hope to make Vinestaff better? How can we actually fix Vinestaff to make her feel worth using and actually not feel like a throw pick in every game mode? Well, the answer is unfortunately pretty simple. You really can't. Let me explain. If you give Vinestaff better self-sustain, it's hard to balance it out without it staying ass for Vine, or making it obscenely broken that Vine cannot really die like how her old E burst could potentially feel like at times. Making her more bulky doesn't do much to solve her problems, or can make her too hard to actually damage through. Anything that you can think of to say Vinestaff either does nothing or makes her overly oppressive because of how volatile her healer game plan is. Maybe you could not totally gut her regen cap as soon as she reaches max HP, but I don't know, man. I am serious when I say this, but right now, the best possible way to fix Vinestaff is by reworking her. I think the idea of reverting Vinestaff is now long gone at this point, and we will never see those days of Vinestaff ever again. And in this current state, Vinestaff is outclassed by every single fighter for any of her potential jobs she could do. Unfortunately, she has no other path to go for unless a miracle happens for our lovely girl. I really wish I could give a much better message to end this video off on and hold on to some small positivity strings. But Vinestaff is actually a lost cause right now unless she gets yet another rework. This rework has completely ruined Vinestaff's position in the game's environment, and after all of this, she is still even more annoying to fight in opens. So this change feels like a net negative, and I don't even want to talk about opens in this video. I could talk more about why Vinestaff is in a horrible state, but the main points of it prove it enough. Vinestaff is a terrible character, and the chances of her being fixable are next to nothing to do outside of another rework. You could literally remove her from the game and nothing will really change about the game at this rate. It's genuinely that bad right now for her, and I just simply wish the best for her. And look, Vinestaff holds so much value for me. She is the fighter that got me back into fighting videos and the game as a whole. She was my main fighter in competitive, and I dedicated so much time to get better at her to the point I have a whole Vine Sona because of how much I love playing her and such. To see her in this state causes me and other dedicated Vinestaff mains to feel dread, and thus, we are forced to move on to other better characters to outclass her like Medkit, or completely different ones that we find more fun and rewarding. We don't find her fun to play anymore. And all of this was caused by one small problem with old Vine's death and her burst healing.